We have an announcement. XY Advisor is raising cash in an equity crowdfund held by Birchal. So you can find it at birchal.com/company/XY Advisor. If you'd like to own a piece of the social network moving forward, it'd be great to have you as an investor. All right, onto the podcast. Welcome to the XY Advisor podcast. To join a global community of financial advisors sharing and learning with one another to drive the positive evolution of financial advice, head to xyadvisor.com. G'day, how's it going? What do you know? Striker like Clayton here from XY Advisor with Adam all the way over in the UK. NextGen Planners, mate, thanks for being here.
Hi, Clayton. How are you?
Well, thank you. So we're having a grand old chat before we actually hit the record button. I was like, actually, let's continue this when there's a little red flashing dot. Mate, what do you foresee there to be in terms of the UK had a huge amount of changes, and Australia has experienced those changes, and then the UK kind of went, oh, wow, it's hard to operate in such a strict environment. So then they kind of loosened the regulations again. Has that been a good result or a bad result ultimately? Or has all of the sort of messing around from a regulatory point of view, is advice in a better position or a worse position now?
That's a great question to get into right at the start, isn't it? And I think it's of course, I'd have to say that yes, it is in a better position now than it was. But we've gone through a really long journey. You know, if you look back to when I started in the profession in the mid-1990s, then I arrived on my first day and I was pointed in the direction of where the training was. I went to the training. I did about a week of one exam and a bit of soft skills training, and I was given a briefcase, because that's what happened back in those days, some 20 pence pieces so I could use a phone if I couldn't find a client's house, a list of telephone numbers, and a maximum investment plan brochure.
Oh, yes.
Armed with a maximum investment plan brochure, I headed out into the world. And of course, every problem was the solution was going to be a maximum investment plan for the first few weeks until there was something else. And, that's how many of us back then started in the profession. I think that, the UK government saw a whole series of mis-selling scandals and a whole series of issues for the customer, and decided that actually what we needed was a single regulator. And so that single regulator came about, and at the beginning of the 2000s, ultimately the Financial Services Authority, and did okay. But it was very much a prescriptive regulator to begin with, and we went through a whole series of changes. The profession in the mid 1980s and late and early 1990s had 250,000 people in the advice space. Today we've got around about 26,000 in the advice space, so a huge decrease in numbers, and a lot of that is to do with technology as well as regulation. But ultimately, you get the regulation that you deserve based on the legislation that you create. And I think that is the fundamental issue. And successive governments tweaked the regulations through the legislation, but then blamed the regulator if it went wrong. And ultimately, if you don't give the regulator the right powers, point them in the right direction, and give them the right guidance from a legislative point of view, it's really hard for the regulator to sit in a space where the consumer population, the advisor population are attacking the regulator when they get it wrong. And their response will often be, well, actually, we don't have the power to do the things that you'd like us to do. And then to be accountable and answerable to government and successive ministers and government committees, where the government committees are actually ultimately responsible for creating that legislation. So, the regulator gets a fair amount of flack. But in terms of the way that the rules have changed, I think that, we are seeing a development in professionalism, and, we are seeing a much higher quality across the board of advice. But of course, there are still issues and there are still rogue players that need to be dealt with. And, the regulator does work hard to do that. But, many would say at times not hard enough. I think that goes back to that legislative issue sometimes and the power that they're given.
Yeah, that's an interesting view of it. I have a similar theory, is that if you solve it at its core, I guess, issue, which is, and let me know if it was similar prior to the changes the UK went through, but you have a million voices, or in reality, in Australia, we have sort of like 6 or 7 or 8 different sort of overlapping legislation and rules and regulations, and they all kind of not fit together properly, and some of it contradicts even the other because they're so autonomous. Did the UK attempt to solve all of the confusion by just saying, actually, we're just going to wrap it up into one place with one final voice, and almost start from the beginning? Would that be one way to look at it?
Oh, it's definitely, yeah, that's definitely what was attempted. And it, ultimately it resulted in, as would be perceived from the politician's point of view, failure. The financial crisis wasn't prevented by the regulator. Now, there's many arguments to say the financial crisis could never have been prevented by the regulator. But, if you don't give your regulator enough power to act, then of course they can't act. They can't act outside of scope and outside of legislation. So ultimately, yes. But I think also for me, the principle of top-down regulation only works so far anyway. It's like any set of rules or laws. You can create a set of rules and laws, but people will break them. And if people have a higher priority, then they will choose that priority over the law or the rule. And that in itself, therefore, is for me only part of the solution. And I think actually the bigger part of the solution is to actually empower the buying population, people who are actually seeking out advice and seeking out these products. If we actually give them higher levels of education so they understand what to look for, people really need to know the difference between what a rogue player and somebody who's professional and trying to do the right job is. And it's not always that clear when you first meet somebody. They're going to look professional, they're going to behave politely, they're going to look to be your friend and build a relationship. So how does the customer actually know the difference? And top-down regulation can't solve that. They can do as many scam adverts and all of the other things that they want, but they'll only reach a small proportion of the population. We need to work much harder at democratizing the process so that people have a much greater understanding.
And then where does NextGen fit in the UK landscape? So you guys sort of approach it very much from we've got some ideas around what improving advice looks like. Here you can opt into our community. Was it an organic sort of, I guess, confusion with the system and wanting to prove it from a bottom up point of view? Is that the story?
Yeah, it's a lot like that. I mean, the story goes, 2 disgruntled northerners in a pub met and discussed the state of the profession, and we joke about that. But when the other Adam and Rohan got together, and on those early days, they got to the point where actually they didn't think that many of the professional events and the things that they were able to attend were for them. And as younger financial planners at the time, then they wanted something a bit different. And we know that as we go forward, communities will dominate brands. It'll be no longer that you'll be able to sell a badge to somebody. It'll be the community that decides whether something is worthwhile or not. And so the point of NextGen Planners was very much to start at that place of community and to get people together who have a learning mentality, and an always learning mentality, to be inclusive and to look to build something that is collaborative. And that is the absolute at the core of NextGen Planners. Are
you familiar with actually, they're called XY Planning Network in the US? Are you familiar with that group of people?
Yeah, we've had Alan Moore over. He spoke at our conference a couple of years back, in actual fact. So,
yeah, right.
Alan gave us a great speech on niching, as he calls it. It still doesn't quite resonate here in the UK. We like to say niche here in the UK, but whichever way around we look at it, he came and talked about niching for us, and yeah, those guys do a great job. And certainly, there's so many organisations around the world that we take inspiration from, because again, it is about it's such a big opportunity, such a big profession, and there's huge levels of disenfranchisement in the the client space. So many people just don't have access to financial planning, financial advice, just basic financial product understanding. And so it's a vast space out there, and there's a comparatively very small population of financial planners, advisors, other people in the profession. So ultimately, yes, we can compete and we can look to gain advantage, or we can just share information. And that environment of sharing information, building understanding, learning from each other, understanding that best practice isn't something that you just have to yourself. Yes, people have intellectual property, their logos, their branding, sometimes their technical approach, whatever it might be. But ultimately, the more we share, then the better we all become. And, that's got to be a good thing, I think.
Yeah, no, goes without saying, it's a mandate that we've sort of held dear, close to us as well. It's just kind of interesting that independently all over the world, this idea that financial planning is too important not to be done well has sprung up all over the world. I find that really interesting, seeing what you guys are doing over in the UK and what the American guys are doing over in the US. I've no doubt that there is a similar thing in South Africa, though it's probably not quite as organized yet, but it definitely looks like it's getting there. It's almost this idea that there's a whole bunch of advisors that take the responsibility of achieving a better outcome for their client as a genuine responsibility, and that it's not just lip service, and that the powerful stakeholders, which is the larger, broader financial services industry, have had their ability to twist and turn financial planning or financial advice to their wants and their desires and their needs for a long time. And I have no qualm against that. That is the nature of capitalism and business models. That's totally fine. But also, in the same breath, it's also the right of the advisors to say, is there anything else? And what's kind of interesting is the conversation has been happening for a long time all over the world. Little shoots have been around for a long time. It's just more so now technology is allowing those people who were originally a disconnected bunch that didn't know about each other to get together and talk and to play a small role in sort of centralizing that conversation and helping to promote that conversation is, as I'm sure you would fully appreciate, is genuinely a good, I would say, job to have, because the impact, if we do our job well, then more advisors get better at their job, and thereby huge amounts of clients are ending up in better positions. So it's actually kind of this, it's a feel-good job, you know what I mean? Like we're doing good work. So I guess the only difference is on our end, we don't happen to have as much experience as you do. So we more facilitate conversations, but I know that you guys are quite pronounced and do a good job, I would say, in that content piece. So can you talk to us a little bit about your background? You mentioned really briefly of how you got into advice, but I'm kind of interested, you're one of the, or at least the internet tells me that you're a well-respected authority in financial planning. Obviously, the NextGen Planning guys were agreed with that concept. You've come on to work with them. So talk to me a little bit about your background or what you do and how your view of advice. And yeah, let's get your opinion on these type of things.
Clayton, thank you. It's interesting and nice to hear you say that I'm an authority. It's I think as we get older and stick around long enough, somebody called me an elder statesman in a piece the other week. So you start hearing these sort of phrases and titles, don't you? But no, I think sometimes it is a little bit about longevity, because we don't spend our entire career getting it right, do we? That's the thing. We are literally always learning, and I think that sometimes you can bring that play in what you then produce later on. I think it is, there is something to be said about experiencing the ups and downs of a profession. When I first started as an industry, you asked sort of a potted history. I was an advisor and planner. I set up an independent financial advisory business, then didn't move, but we created at the same time a compliance organization. I was relatively dissatisfied with the service that I was getting and from my existing compliance provider. And, when you, oftentimes in small businesses, you'll be aware, if you can't find it yourself and buy it from somebody else, then, you instantly think, well, that might be an opportunity. There's clearly a gap in the market to do it that way. So we launched a compliance consultancy, and then I pivoted out of advice ultimately and moved much more onto the regulatory side. Worked with the UK regulator, and then moved forward to from that place into learning and development. Because once I'd seen the regulatory side, and I did some investigative work on behalf of the regulator in the UK. And once I'd seen that side of things, you begin to build a picture. You've seen it from the advice side. You've seen it from the regulator's point of view. And then you can, maybe begin to think, right, okay, how do we begin to connect these two? So I began to look at how I develop learning and development sort of practice, and how I looked at training. So I took a load of training accreditations and further qualifications outside of the financial planning profession. We do all of our professional qualifications, but I'm currently president of the Personal Finance Society, the largest professional body in the UK, but I'm also a member of another professional body, the Chartered Management Institute. And I don't think that you should be necessarily just part of one professional body. There are lots of skills that we need in financial services and in financial planning in particular that aren't always satisfied by one single professional body. And I think we can sometimes be a bit blinkered to that. So my career went down that path, and these days, obviously, I do consultancy work and focus on what I do within NextGen Planners. And the big thing for me is, you're right, the profession is now global, and that's remarkable. What we can achieve via conversations like this is great. And lockdown, I think, has really opened that out, because more and more people have recognized that this is possible. Sometimes those of us, I'm sure, like yourself, Clayton, who have been using this type of technology for a long time, sometimes you think you've not got many mates to talk to online, in Zoom rooms, etc. And then suddenly, lockdown has opened that out, because everybody now understands how to Zoom, and ultimately then we're able to talk to more people. And we came off the back of our global commute a couple of months ago, which was an amazing experience. I know you were tied up at the time, I think, having a baby, weren't you? But
yes, that was it was a tough time.
It's a shame you missed that, but more important things, obviously. But to be able to take 24 hours and to speak to financial planners all over the world, but to really, in the first couple of hours, I began to think, these guys are all saying the same thing. From every nation in every time zone. And as we went through America, and then we came through Hong Kong and Singapore and Dubai and South Africa and Australia and New Zealand, of course, along the way, everybody was saying the same thing. Everybody wants to be customer focused. Everybody wants to improve the profession. Everybody wants to share good practice. And, that's quite amazing when you begin to look outward, outside of your little territory, and begin to look around the world and see that we are part of a global profession. That's inspiring stuff. It was even inspiring in hour 23, when I was still awake and just reaching for that finish line. But when you look at the amount of great people that are out there, really just promoting financial planning, I think that for me, the way that the profession is developing to a disintermediated space, where ultimately there isn't a product at the end of it, does begin to move the balance of power away from providers and more into the hands of the financial planning profession. But of course, with that comes great responsibility, as they say. And to quote Peter Parker's uncle from Spider-Man, I think that was, wasn't it? But ultimately, we need to think about the people who we don't serve sometimes as well. The profession is getting really good, and financial planning is getting really good at providing a great high-level service. But I'm really concerned that we don't price people out of the market. And if we spend our time looking after clients in a particular segment and we niche, then that's great for individual businesses. But how good is it for our society? And I think that as a profession, what we do need to do is remember that we have a responsibility to society to do this great work as well.
Yeah, that is I guess you're talking about we call it the positive evolution of financial advice. Like as advice evolves into a full and complete profession. David Haynes, I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but he talks about above the line, below the line. And so combining those two elements would be the holistic view of advice. And a lot of us and a lot of the attention is on making sure that everything above the line, everything below the line is done as well as possible. And you're just serving your clients and delivering fantastic outcomes. And that's the goal. But that does come with a price tag. And it's very interesting because then you do it then becomes an elite service, I guess, or almost like law or even like accounting, right? Maybe not accounting so much, but certainly that it becomes something for the top sort of echelon of people to be able to afford and be able to get the benefit of. And then the amount of good, because the facts are that financial planning has done so much more good than bad over the years. It just so happens that unfortunately a lot of bad has occurred. But in a lot of ways, yeah, the downside of this onward march to improving financial planning is kind of leaving the average family behind. And I kind of look at it as in personality wise, and the research sort of backs this up. A bit high level, about 50% of people are DIY, want to do it themselves. And about 50% of people want to do things with other people. And out of the people that kind of would do it with other people, then you're really looking at only about half of those can really afford to get the advice and the other half can't. And so, and then that's just of the adult population. And I'm not sure what the percentage of advised clients in the UK is, but over in Australia, that sort of represents how many people are getting advice, sort of that the half of people that want help and the half of those that can afford it. And so you're looking at about 75% of the population that aren't getting advice or including children be like sort of 80, 85%. But that whole segment of society, they need help as well. And so I'm with you entirely. I'm actually really clear on and I'm really bullish on face-to-face financial planning. I think good financial or great financial planning is the best thing money can buy. And I don't think that a human-led financial planning to those A, that want it, and B, can afford it, is going anywhere anytime soon. I actually think it's going to be one of the last things, along with, health and wealth are the two most important parts of life. It's super emotional. Corporate finance is corporate in nature, but personal finance is personal in nature. And you can't tell me, no matter how good Siri gets, that I'm going to have emotional conversations with Siri. Siri is going to be fantastic for me to solve problems, but it's not going to be relevant to me to discuss the fact that I just became a father for a tip for a time-bound example. So I think financial planning, which skews far more into the personal finance sector, I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon. I'm really clear. I'm really bullish, and I think it's a great profession. I want to see it succeed. I'm also really clear on the other 75 or 80% that still need it, because I think that there's a lot of benefit for them. It's just those particular tools and methodologies aren't for them, but that's okay. Then there needs to be solutions for them. But I don't see them competing, because either the people want to do it themselves and they are DIY and they want a tech solution, or they can't afford the full service. And so I know that there's a guy in Brazil that's given advice to like 500,000 people. There's a podcast here in Australia called The Goals Based Advice, run by Fraser. Shout out Fraser. He interviewed a Brazilian chap not too long ago. Name escapes me, but what he's done doesn't, which is he's been able to give advice for 500,000 people, and now he's aiming for 1 million, right? So there are solutions on this scalable piece, and I think that's a huge undertaking, and I think a lot of advisors do need to eventually get into that, because that is the huge sector of the market. In my mind, I'm really clear. Like, one is for people who want to pay, and one is for the masses. That's sort of that 75, 80% of people. So both of those, because ultimately people in better financial positions are just happier. I mean, the number one stress in people's lives is money. So if you can help solve that, there's a huge amount of people that need to get help via human-led help. And I honestly don't think that's going anywhere. I'm really bullish on that in the future. But yeah, for a lot of people, these tech solutions are a great solution. And those two strategies are for two totally different people, and neither the two shall meet.
I think you make some good points. Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, the one thing that comes in additionally to play there is when we think about the demographic model of in the UK, our financial planning and advising population. We're not getting any younger, and ultimately we have this gap where actually the profession didn't recruit for a while. When I came into the profession in the mid-1990s, there was a lot of recruitment going on, but then it all stopped as regulatory change occurred. We talked about that earlier on, didn't we? And ultimately, one of the things that regulatory change did, it created additional risk for the providers who were the mainstay of recruitment in the profession, and they saw that additional risk and that uncertainty as a barrier to continuing to spend the amount of money they spent on recruitment. So we now have a situation where the average advisor age is mid-50s, and we don't have enough people coming into the profession at this point with enough experience to actually build a proper succession path across the profession. And when we see the profession being, let's be generous and say it's 50 years old. And but ultimately, financial planning, took a long time to really begin to gain traction. So only in the last 20 to 25 years have we seen, this idea of a much bigger financial planning market. And I think for me, that's one of the big challenges, is that we are the first generation of financial planners who have had to think about sustainability. And it's been very relatively easy to find new clients in the space that we've been needing clients to fit a particular business model. The high cost of regulation, the high cost of qualifications, examinations, building a practice, all of those things can be funded if you can find the right type of clients who will be able to access your product or service at that price point to achieve it, and to ensure that the business that you've got is sustainable in the short term. But I worry about how many of these businesses are sustainable in the long term when we look at a heavy reliance on this idea of intergenerational transfer of wealth, which on the back of two massive financial crises, I'm not sure that intergenerational transfer of wealth will occur in the way in which many of these businesses are hoping it might. And I think that's why we need to do the work to build bridges to a new generation, because ultimately that new generation is going to have quite a lot of demands on any inherited wealth that previous generations didn't have. Inherited wealth could continue to be saved by our parents, and now I think people will be looking to pay off mortgages, get onto the housing ladder, pay off student debt, all of those things that actually now exist in the forefront of people's minds when it comes to just getting by. And how do we pivot some of those now what we would call traditional financial planning models to be able to be sustainable? Because I want to see businesses that last 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years beyond their current practitioners, the people who are running and owning them now. But I'm not sure that many have got a plan beyond their own retirement for their business. And there's a real risk for me that as we go forward over the next 10, 15, 20 years, that many of the great financial planning businesses will stop when their current leaders within those businesses retire, and will be consolidated into the marketplace. And that for me is a shame, because I think that we've built something, and we are at now a point where what happens and the decisions that are made in the next 10 years are likely to be quite pivotal.
Yeah. what do you see as the future of financial planning? How do you see it in, say, 10 years from now?
I think you're right. There is going to be a much more, I think there's going to be a much greater understanding of how technology can help the process to take those people who are disenfranchised and give them a product or a service that actually, begins to build momentum. But I also think that, I think we will use more technology. I'm not as against the idea of artificial intelligence as many would be. And I think actually artificial intelligence can really help in a situation where, if we are talking to more people, particularly through the medium of the internet and Zoom, and we're having fewer face-to-face meetings, it's harder to pick up on some of those nuances that actually we would pick up more in a meeting. And the way that AI is going, it's now getting to the point where certain AI is beginning to understand the emotional responses of human beings and those subtle facial cues and those tiny things that actually it's far harder for us to notice in normal conversation. And blending technology and using technology as a tool to help us better understand the people that we're talking to, I think will begin to become the norm. Now, again, with everything, it needs to be checked, and we need to make sure that actually there is, we don't have an asymmetry of knowledge or power. And, our profession in some ways has relied for many years, not necessarily in the financial planning space, but in the advising space generally, has relied in many years in this idea of this asymmetry of power. We have the knowledge, and therefore we charge you to use the knowledge that we have. And, when we think about how we democratize that, the idea would be to actually give away more of that knowledge, to put that up front, and then to assist people in implementing it. Because, when knowledge is available at the push of a button, we can all Google search a solution, but actually, why don't we then go and take action with it? And I think financial planning is about helping people understand their motivations about taking action. So we can let go of the knowledge. The knowledge is we have to have it, and so we have to study, and that is part of our professional requirements. But actually, it doesn't mean that we have to keep it. And I think that the more that we share the knowledge over the next 10 years in particular, and the more that we can get out there in terms of that core information, then we can really just begin to build relationships with people and guide them in terms of how to use that knowledge that we've shared.
Yeah, I think the internet, just by virtue of the fact that you can access any data at any point, threw a wrench into all professional services, including even medicine. I mean, who doesn't Google doctor themselves before going to a doctor, right? And then you're sitting there and you're like, oh, look, I'm pretty sure it's cancer. And they're like, mate, it's not cancer. And you're like, look, I've Googled it and it's definitely cancer. That's just reality. Yeah. And so I think financial planning and all professional services lived in that idea that we are the masters of the universe in this domain, and then you pay us for access, as you mentioned, and implementation. But as that's changed with the internet, I still think, and as you've said, I fully agree that implementation and understanding why are two elements that are difficult to quantify, but are insanely valuable. And we know as advisors that all of the benefits of advice happen on the other side of implementation and of understanding. Because if you better understand why you want something, then you're more likely to implement correctly and implement in the long term and not really waver from that, and then ultimately end up with the better outcome. And then that's the joy of financial planning, isn't it? You get to the end of that little short journey and having a client sort of thank you, or it might be short or it might be long sometimes. I didn't get to be a financial planner for my entire career. A part of me always wishes I did and I had stayed, but at the end of the day, I needed to get out there. But yeah, it's too important, I think, not to improve. It's too important not to get right. And I'm just really, I guess, encouraged that the amount of international conversations I'm having on this, everyone agrees. There was recently something out of the US, life-centered planning the US and the UK. I think there was a combined thing. In all of that, I saw a term, it was humans under management. I don't know anything about that, who it is or what it is, but I loved that that name, humans under management. I thought that was a very, very, very cool concept. And yeah, it's I think for the amount of stakeholders that have tried to control financial planning, I think the game is up. That's kind of how I feel. And I know that there's always going to be advisors out there that say, oh, this is just pop psychology and it's not real financial planning. People pay me to do this, that, and the other. And you know what? Like, I totally get it. Some clients, they don't want a bar of it. You ask them what they want out of life, they go 10.5% return. Thanks, mate. So I totally get it. And if you're an advisor and that's what you deliver, then power to you. You know, I've got no problems with that. But I think the entire conversation around financial planning since, as you said, even if we're generous and we say 50 years, it was exactly that, right? And so I think stretching the conversation now to include people who engage with their money on a more emotional, and the idea that life decisions are money decisions and money decisions are life decisions, I think it's opened up what advisors can do for clients. And in a lot of ways, it's the result of, I guess you would say, the rise of the consumer, the desire to be helpful and to solve real problems, and competing in this sort of open market, not being this little tidy profession tucked away where we get paid our own little special way, and we don't do that whole acquire clients and then charge money. We do our own little thing. Well, it's kind of come to an end as well. And in a lot of ways, I mean, don't get me wrong, like, change in real time sucks. Like, no one likes to go through change. And I think financial advisors the world over have been forced through change, rapid change as well, but there's a lot of positivity on the other side. So before we go, what are some really cool things that NextGen Planners has created in terms of content? How do people find out about it if they're interested? And how do people find out more?
Yeah, well, thank you. And it's nice to ask. And we should give a shout out to the work that Andy Hart at Humans Under Management is doing, actually, because Andy's a friend of NextGen Planners. He's been a member at NextGen Planners since the very, very beginning. I think he was in the first 20 people to join NextGen Planners. And they've got a conference coming up in September. And based around South Africa, of course, it'll be a virtual conference now. But Andy's been taking that message out around the world for 3 years more now. So, he's doing a great job. And yeah, sometimes you look at a phrase that someone comes up with and you look at their branding, you think, oh, if only I'd have thought of that. And you've got to give it to Andy for that one. It's great. But yeah, at NextGen Planners, we've got so much on, and it's always great to be creating. And the big point for us is that we want to create a platform, and then we want to put some great people on that platform. So, of course, we do our training contract work, and we do the practical nuts and bolts work of supporting people through their careers. But the whole point is that we've created this structure of classroom through to boardroom. So over the next 6 months, we're rolling out our university boot camp. To more and more universities, 13 across the UK, working alongside the Chartered Insurance Institute to do that. And so there we pair undergraduates with employers. We put them through their paces for a day so that the employers can really see the skills and behaviours of those undergraduates. And that's purely a pro bono piece that we do in order to find people jobs. And it's about actually creating jobs, because so much of the work that we do as a profession is about talking to people about they should be joining the profession. And we do quite a lot of that. But actually, from our point of view, it's more about the practical. Let's get these people into real jobs. And so really excited about that. We're expanding our speaker and influencer program. So this year, our conference, we traditionally over years done our normal conference piece where you'd invite speakers, fly them in from all around the world, they'd stand on stage, and we'd get our community together to watch these great speakers. But What I realized looking at our conference in 2018, in 2019, sorry, the years are merging now because of lockdown. But yeah, in 2019, I looked at that and thought, well, actually, what people are here for is to meet each other. We've got such a great community that people just want to meet their mates. They want to catch up, they want to talk. And although the conference speakers were great, the real buzz was around, actually meeting people that they've connected with online over the course of a year. And so we turned it on its head and created the Speaker and Influencer program to put 30 people on our stage in this year's conference that hadn't spoken publicly much at all, some of them not at all. And we put them through a 6-month program to effectively, look after their presentation skills, help them with the narrative of their talk, but also we provided mental health support because that's really important. When you look at the level of stress that public speaking has for many people, that we needed to make sure that they were supported in that way. And that 6-month program then in our virtual conference, as it turned out to be, put them on stage on the main day of our conference for their talks, and that was just an amazing experience. We talk about the journey, don't we? And in fairness, it really was journey from people who started with no speaking experience to get up there and do that and deliver it incredibly well. And our goal is to create this platform and then help our community with it. So next year we're taking that into 4 countries. We're doing 120 speakers. So we're going to be inviting volunteers from Australia, South Africa, America, and the UK. And we will put them through the program. It's all free for our people who volunteer to get them to a point where they're confidently delivering their talk at conference. And then beyond that, we then help them to find other opportunities to spread their message and to sort of go out there into the world and spread a really great message of financial planning and how it is to be part of this great community. So that's exciting. We have our accelerator program to help younger financial planners and those who are looking to develop their businesses to get a foot in the door and get off the ground for those. And we have our future leaders program, which again is part of this idea of classroom to boardroom. We've been working for a number of years now with financial planners, and many of them are getting to the point where they're ready to knock on the door of their current employers and to say, we actually want to step up into senior positions within this business. But again, there's not a lot out there to help financial planners to understand the concepts around leadership and management and running a business and corporate governance. All of our qualifications tend to focus very much on technical financial planning aspects. And so we've put a program together there to support in that. And a whole heap of other things that I'm not allowed to talk about yet. I've probably said too much already.
That's all right. It sounds amazing. That sounds really cool. So most importantly, how do people find out more?
Oh, they can come to the website. They can listen to the podcast. They can contact me directly. We're all on the various social media channels and all that type of stuff. We're actually going to, we're putting some stuff out on XY Advisor over the coming weeks, particularly related to the Speaker and Influencer program.
Hey,
so it'd be great to hear from. Yeah, it'd be great to hear from some Australian planners who want to join that program over the 6 months, January through to the summer next year.
I'm terrified of speaking. I might join.
It's open to all, and the big thing with it is that I think that's the thing is the fear of public speaking in particular. Now we can do this type of stuff. We can chat on podcasts and Zoom and all the rest of it. But actually, even on a Zoom, when it comes to the fact that you've got 120, 200, 300, whatever number of people it is that are actually sat just staring at a screen with you talking on it, it's still intimidating, even if you're not in an auditorium. We are very hopeful that at least part of our conference next year can be auditorium based, but much of it will still be virtual because we want to reach a global audience. And awesome. We recognized this year that when we pivoted to that virtual conference concept, that so many of our members from around the world were able to join it that wouldn't have got to London. And it's finding a blend. It's about, I think, doing some of it in a physical realm and then some of it in a virtual realm so that we can be inclusive. It's hard to be inclusive if actually to get there, people have got to get on international flights, etc. So I think that, we're looking to make the most of both aspects of that.
Awesome. Well, mate, it sounds really good. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing. if I could, I would definitely fly over there. But alas, Qantas is not allowing anyone out of this country.
No, sadly, at this point, we're all in semi-lockdown along the way, aren't we? But you know, it's interesting for me, Clayton, that it's brought more of us together as well. You know, we feel more separate, physically restrained, but actually, you know, we can talk to people all over the world. I think we're now more willing and open to do it. You know, just this conversation wouldn't have happened 6 months ago had it not been for the fact that, you know, we've created this new space where we talk. And I think that's, you know, there are lots of horrible things going on in the world, but the fact that we're able to do this and to talk to our peers and to talk to people who are just really engaged and interested in what we are doing in the financial planning profession, I think that's brilliant.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Well, again, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks very much.